Here is to give us a presentation, hopefully something we understand, on the 2008 Willamette BiOp that is driving a lot of what's going on here. We all know that despite the rain that we get occasionally here in the great state of Oregon on the west side, water is becoming a very precious resource. And how we allocate that water, how we make sure our fisheries are intact, how we make sure the cities have water at critical times, and how we make sure that agriculture can still flourish is really, really important. And so the goal here is to, at least in Oregon, at least in Wilsonville, on this particular day, we're going to have a common set of facts that we all operate from. We're going to have three basic presentations that Kevin will be doing, and after each segment, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. I'd ask you, you should have access to cards, I believe. And if you don't, we can get them to you. If you have questions as the presentation goes on, and get those to my team, Suzanne, and whoever, but Suzanne's there for sure. Just hold your card up and we'll get it from you, okay? So you can ask questions. I'd like Kevin to go through each segment without being interrupted so we can get a full picture of what he wants to tell us. And then we'll have a question period. The question and the presentation periods will vary in length, as will the question and answer periods. But we'll try and do it in a controlled manner because there's a lot of information. I know there are going to be a ton of questions. And if we don't get to your question, we will make sure somebody does answer your question after the meeting and at the appropriate time. So that's enough talking from me. With that,
Congressman, could I?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, the mayor. I'm sorry. We should do that. I'm not good at this.
Mayor Tim Knapp, welcome to Wilsonville. Thank you all for coming out. An important issue for us here in Wilsonville, as well as the entire region and the entire state, obviously. Just to give you a little context that goes back a little further, of course, the Native Americans used to gather around the river in this part of the world, and especially at Willamette Falls, and it was a gathering point for years. As the white settlers started coming in, it became a gathering point also. Mountain man Daniel Boone's grandson and great-grandson came here, opened a ferry boat across the river right down here in 1847. Worked good until the gold rush happened in 1849 California, and everybody, including them, got up and went to California to try to strike it rich. Alphonse got sick and didn't get back. His son Jesse, Daniel Boone's great-grandson, operated the ferry here for, thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
Operated the ferry here for about 30-some years, and there was a lot of activity. What became known as Boone's Ferry Road, that we still have access to the ferry boat right down here in Wilsonville, and the farmers took their crops to market and got their supplies in on the river. The river was a major point even then. The other thing that was true at that point is people took their land use seriously. Jesse was eventually killed in a gunfight over land use right here in Wilsonville, and we still take our land use pretty seriously around here, so it's an ongoing thing. The river is hugely important. Wilsonville sits at the interface between the urban area and the rural area, and the river is kind of a natural dividing line. Our land use laws say that we will honor the urban and the rural reserves that are planned, and we work very hard to maintain that. Wilsonville has grown up into a city of 25,000 people now. Kind of atypically, we have 23,000 full-time jobs. Those jobs have an aggregate payroll of $1.1 billion currently in Wilsonville. So thank you for coming. Congressman, thank you for hosting, and I hope that this is very informative. I'm sure it will be on many issues that are important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Really appreciate Wilsonville's hospitality. Great spot to everyone can get to. With that, let's have the Colonel, if you don't mind, introduce his team and go from there.
Congressman Schrader, again, thank you. And again, thank you for putting this together, this public session, for us to be able to kind of share information, kind of, I guess what I always say, level the bubbles, so we can provide you some facts and our understanding of what we see the issues and where we are. I'd also like to know that Mr. Kevin Bryce will be kind of the primary presenter today. He is the district's senior civilian. He's been here for a while, and he has a really good understanding, and hopefully we'll be able to articulate some of that to you today. We've also brought up kind of a number of experts here. They're out in the crowd. They can raise their hand from our team that are here to be able to provide and help answer some questions or be able to provide more information or context to some of the particular issues or some of the things that we're doing here in the Valley. So with that, Kevin, I pass to you, and I look forward to a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Congressman. The delegation staff, I'd like to say thank you for helping today. Mr. Mayor, your staff has been very helpful in getting things set up, so thank you for the chance today. And sir, if you don't mind, I'm going to walk around just a little bit to make it a little more interesting. But also, please know, I'm excited because I get to talk a little bit about something that I'm very passionate about. And it's about the role that the Corps of Engineers, in particular the Portland District, plays for our nation. And although, you know, we're part of a big bureaucracy, but we're also an organization that does a lot, in my view, for the nation. And I'm very proud of the role that we play in concert with our federal and state partners. And to get to tell you a little bit about that, I'm very excited. I know that folks don't always agree with what we do, don't agree with the paths that we go down, but we have 1,400 folks in the Portland District, dedicated public servants who try to do the best for our nation. And I hope I get to paint that little picture, at least from our view of the world. As the Congressman said, what we plan to do is there's 3 sections. I'll kind of talk about the BiOps as an overview to set the stage. Then what we'll do is talk about some of the ongoing actions, because I know that one of the things we hear quite often is, when can we, as the public, provide input, and when will that happen? And then the last will be what next steps are. Spoiler alert, way back at slide number 73 or something, there's a 4-bullet slide that talks about the ongoing actions and where we are in the public outreach. And so by the time we get there, I hope that I get to paint a picture that you'll have an idea about what those inputs are. And so that's what my goal is from a very high level. As the Colonel mentioned, we do have experts in the room, so that way afterwards, if you have specific questions, you can meet our team. And as we go through the presentation and get to those parts, I will introduce those folks as we go. So I need my team to help, if I forget that, make sure that I introduce you as we go. So let's jump right into it. As the Congressman said, we'll do these 3 presentations and then break for questions and answers. And when we look at the first section, as far as the 2008 BiOp, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history and background. And that starts with, I apologize, but a big picture Corps of Engineers down to what we have in the Willamette Valley. Talk a little bit about the work we did with our action agency partner at BPA, and then with the services, and then a little bit about what the BiOp says and where we are on progress made to date. Corps of Engineers, big picture. If you haven't heard this, I apologize. Or if you have heard this, I apologize. But very simply, when you look across the nation, the Corps of Engineers headquarters is in D.C. There are 9 divisions around the world, and there's 45 districts. Portland District is one of 45 districts. And those districts have one or more of these missions. In Portland District, we are primarily a civil works district, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But we also have an IIS, or Interagency and International Support Program. Side note, that IIS program is normally about $3 million a year for us. We have like 300 projects going on at any one time. That's normally about $3 million. We are in the process of working with the VA to take on the rehabilitation of the VA Medical Center up on Pill Hill by Oregon Health Science University. There's a VA hospital up there, and we have the mission to rehabilitate that with the VA. So that's about to get really big for us. As far as the Civil Works program, though, what that means for us is for our nation's waters, we have the responsibilities to balance these sometimes competing needs for the use of those waters. And that's what our mission is. We provide the 104 miles or so between Portland and the mouth of the Columbia River is a pushing $30 billion highway as far as water goods. We maintain that channel. We also have the responsibility to, with our action agency partner at Bonneville Power, to produce hydropower. Those are authorized purposes. We also take care of recreation for those in the rec community. We also have a fish and wildlife mission. So our job for federal waterways is to balance these sometimes needs. We also have a tribal trust responsibility where the tribes are separate nations and we have consultation requirements that we work with the tribes as we do our mission. Because we're a water-based organization, when you look across the nation, there are 9 divisions. And as you can tell, we are organized by watersheds, which makes sense since that's what our mission is. You have the Long Skinny Division, Mississippi Valley Division. In Portland, we're part of Northwestern Division, which encompasses the Missouri River Basin and also the Columbia River Basin. And so there are 5 districts in Northwestern Division. You can see them there: Kansas City, Omaha, Walla Walla, Seattle, and of course, Portland. So what that means for the Portland district, this is our boundary. We cover most of Oregon, not all. We don't cover the eastern portion. That's part of the Snake River Valley, the Snake watershed. So water flows to the east. Walla Walla district works with Civil Works. We don't have Klamath, that flows south. But we do have Southwest Washington, where Mount St. Helens is, for instance. So this is the area that Portland District has, and you can see the little black marks and the little yellow circles. Those are all of our authorized projects for the Portland District. And in fact, one of the things that's very important to understand about our Civil Works program is that we are authorized and appropriated annually, for the most part, by separate project. So therefore, Bonneville Dam will get a separate appropriation every year. Bonneville Dam starts with a set of authorized purposes back in the 30s when we built Bonneville Dam, and every year we get appropriations for Bonneville Dam. We get the same for John Day and the Dalles, and I'll talk more about the Valley in a minute. One of the important things is the ability for us to move monies is relatively limited. And that makes sense because Congress has the power of the purse. And through the budget process, that's where priorities are set, and therefore we execute the will of the American people. So we are authorized and appropriated for the most part by separate projects. There are times when, and you'll see as part of paying how we do work for the BiOp implementation, that we have one line item that pays for all of that BiOp work. And I'll explain that in a minute. So therefore, when you look at the map of the district, for the most part, all of these yellow dots and the black squares have a separate authority when they were first authorized for construction. And every year we get annual appropriations. For instance, Bonneville Dam, when it was first built, as a side, Bonneville Dam is not authorized for flood risk management. So although, yes, we hold water behind Bonneville, and yes, it goes up and down, we don't. Now, if we can get benefits that way, we can do it, but that's not what the dam was built for. So we don't have the authority for flood risk. When you go up to John Day, that was built more for flood, or authorized for. So we have the authorities. In the Valley, it's very complicated. You'll see in a minute, we have 13 projects, 10 different appropriations every year that we get for those projects. They have different authorities. It's one of the bureaucratic things that, as appropriate, that we have to work through as we do the work for the American people for our missions. So when you look at our annual appropriations bill, and I'm sorry this is as deep as I'll go, but we have basically 3 accounts. Investigations are studies. Constructing is when you're constructing new projects. And then operations and maintenance is what it says. It's operating and maintain the facilities that we have. One of the important things that we do have in Portland is we also, and it's also in Seattle and Walla Walla, we also receive direct funding from Kieran, from Bonneville Power Administration. They pay for the direct costs associated with producing hydropower. We received an authority back decades ago that said, yes, Corps, you can take direct funding from Bonneville. And we do that. Not only do they pay for the direct, they pay their share of the joint costs. Joints are, for instance, at a dam, you have a spillway. Spillway isn't there just for flood. Okay, sometimes you use the spillway when you're not going to produce hydropower. I mean, it's not a direct. So therefore, if we do repairs to a spillway, there's a percent that BPA has to pay for that joint cost. as an example. So when you look at, this is every year, the energy and water bill is the bill that funds the Civil Works program. And we look at construction, we received an authority that says, Kevin's oversimplified, and I have lawyers in the room to help correct this, but Kevin's simple way of saying it is, you have the authority to implement the BiOps on the Columbia River and in the Willamette Valley, and this is the funding that you use. So every year, we get an authority for Columbia River fish mitigation that we use to pay for the work, a lot of the work that you see. But it can't pay for everything. It's authority to implement those BiOps. There are O&M funding we get every year. There are some things that we do at the projects that will help implement, but it's more appropriate part of our O&M program. And so out of the 13 dams that we have in the Willamette Valley, 10 of them, or we have 10 separate appropriations to pay for those projects. As I mentioned earlier, BPA pays their fair share. They pay for all the direct costs. They also pay, this is just an example, at Cougar, Detroit, and Lookout Point for the capital, the construction work that we do, and for the O&M, what percentages BPA has to pay back the Treasury for work that we do in the projects. That just gives you an idea that where our costs from. Finally, in a little bit, I'm going to be talking about, we do have one study that actually began a long time ago in the early 90s, the Willamette Basin Review, and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit. So we have a separate authority. We started a study, and we get annual appropriations to do that study, the Willamette Basin Review Reallocation Study. So I'm going to be talking about that project in a little bit. So let me switch bases then. That's kind of the core stuff. Let me jump into the Willamette and talk about the Willamette Basin. Of course, part of the Columbia River watershed, and the primary purpose, from between statehood in the 1940s, what my understanding is there were like no less than 15 major flood events. And so our nation decided to invest in the Willamette Valley to reduce the flood risk downstream within the valley and all the way down to Portland. And the result of that, I think the first dam was built in 1941, Fern Ridge, is that right, Eric? And then finished in 1969 was the dams that we have in the Willamette Valley. And that's where we are today as far as the projects. There are 13 multi-purpose projects. They go everything from concrete to earth fill. Some of them are extremely tall, 450 feet. I think we have a couple that are around 100 foot tall. But these are the projects that when we look at implementing the Columbia River fish mitigation work to support the BiOps, these are the projects we're talking about. So in summary, it's important to also understand there's a big difference between our projects in the Willamette Valley versus those on the Columbia. If you've been to Bonneville or the Dalles or John Day, you know, those projects were primarily authorized more for navigation, hydropower production, okay? Yes, there is some flood risk management. There's a recreation, there's water supply. But if you look at those, we have huge nav locks because of the river highway, okay? In the Willamette, the dams are narrow. Dams are extremely tall, like I said, up to 450 plus feet. The primary consideration when we operate those projects is for flood risk management. And then we have other authorities that we have and other considerations that we operate, but the primary consideration is flood risk. And they're different sorts of dams. And those are the ones that we're working with as we implement the BiOp. One of the things, oops, did I jump one ahead? No, okay. Thanks, Ian. One of the things about the Willamette dams is that we operate, because of the consideration for flood risk, we operate, and I know there's lots of discussion about the rule curve and what the rule curve is. So I don't want to go into great detail, but I want to show you that this is how we operate the projects. The black line that you see across is what the rule curve is. And as you go through the year, the idea is we keep the level. This example is Detroit Lake. The idea is that when we operate Detroit Lake, we need to keep it underneath the level underneath that rule curve. And the reason for that is for the flood risk. When you go either to the far right or the far left, you see the rule curve at its lowest. That's in the winter months. And obviously, we want to have storage behind Detroit. So when you get those rain events, you have the storage to protect and then release the water at a more timely fashion and in a safer fashion to reduce flood risk. You can see in the green, for instance, is inflow. The blue is outflow. You can see in December, the far left of the chart, in January this year, this is 2009, you can see we had several events, okay, that came very quickly in January that year. And you can see also that if you look at the red line, which is the actual elevation that we maintained through the year, you can see that it half filled Detroit up in a matter of a week. One of the things about the Valley projects is that they can fill on rain events, they can fill in a matter of days. Because of what's downstream, it will take weeks as we slowly draw the pool down to release that water. So therefore, we need that storage in the winter, and Detroit is one of the rule curves that we have for all of the projects. So then, when we look at the valley, then the summary is there are 13 dams. 10 of them we have 10 separately appropriated projects. So for instance, Detroit and Big Cliff are combined for appropriations purposes because they work together. But we have 10 separate appropriations. Of the 13, 10 of them are storage dams. We have 8 hydro plants. We have 3 re-regulating dams. We have large pool fluctuations, up to 160 feet. Okay, that's one of the things you're going to hear about in a little bit when we get to cougar, as far as how much cougar goes up and down. And we have to try to collect fish who swim at the surface, is one of the challenges that we have. And the authorized purposes are listed there. Again, primary consideration for flood risk in the Willamette Valley. So that's a little bit about the core, a little bit about the Willamette Valley and the projects that we have. Let me shift into setting the stage for the biological opinions that we got in 2008. First of all, the 2008 NIMS, we have 2 BiOps, one from NIMS and one from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay, they're complementary documents. So many of the actions are the same from one to the other. But the species that are affected are shown here under NIMS. The Upper Willamette River Spring Chinook and the Upper Willamette River Winter Steelhead are the two species that, and Kim, correct me if my words are wrong here, but those are the 2 species that would be jeopardized by the continued existence and operations of the project. Is that close enough? Close enough. Okay. I got to look at my lawyer if she she said, no, you can't say that. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service BiOp had to do with bull trout and Oregon chub. Good news story, though, in 2015, Oregon chub, thanks to great work between our joint teams and with the state, Oregon chub was actually delisted. And I'm looking at Bruce now from ODF&W because it was a great partnership with ODF&W to make that happen. So what this means, at the time that NIMS issued the BiOp in 2008, at that time, we did have for the species mentioned, we had a trend that was declining, okay? And at that time, the conclusion was that improved fish passage would be necessary for survival, which is, and for continued existence of the species, and then not precluding the idea of going ahead with recovery. And so this was part of the BiOp, and because I'm talking Kim's slide, I'm going to let Kim say, is there anything you'd like to add, Kim, or correct, please?
No, I think that's close enough. I mean, the action is required to improve fish passage, which is necessary for survival and recovery, which would avoid jeopardizing the species.
Thank you, sir. So with that said, here's a pictorial of the species. So we have the 4 subbasins on the east side. Chinook is present in all 4. In the north and south Santiam, we have steelhead. And then in McKenzie, we have bull trout. McKenzie and Middle Fork, we also have bull trout. In Oregon chub, we're in all basins. But as I said, we have had Oregon chub delisted. Now, I know there's a lot of you, I almost grabbed one, but I thought my PAO wouldn't appreciate it. You guys who are wearing the recovery, the stickers, and I know from a federal agency, that's not, but, so for you guys who are experts, Tom, where'd you go, Tom? where'd Tom go? He's going to help me out. Tom is going to help me out here. Is that if I say this wrong, here's Kevin's explanation of the fish, right? We all know the life cycle, and I apologize since you guys are experts. As far as the fish spawn, swim to the ocean, live 2 to 4 years, and return, and then spawn again. And with the life cycle, one of the things about the BiOps is that when you put a dam in the middle, it does interrupt that life cycle. And the question is, how do we account for that? Original plan was using hatcheries when the dams were first built. We have learned a lot, and the BiOps help us learn that. So the question is, what do we do as far as helping with the life cycle that we broke? When we were negotiating the BiOps back in 2008, there was a conundrum, especially for the action agencies. We had to provide actions that provided certainty to help the fish. We are also part of a federal budgeting process. We are a nation, Kevin's word, we're a nation at debt. We're a nation that funding priorities are challenged, and we have got to make, as Congress and the administration, but as Congress makes decisions on the prioritization across the nation, then the question becomes one of how we have to show that we are providing value to the taxpayers, and in the case of BPA, who's direct funding, the ratepayers. And so this was a challenge that we had back when the BiOps were being written. We have to have certainty we're going to produce results. We have to have certainty that we are spending our tax dollars and ratepayer dollars the best that we can. And so the way the BiOp was written from my perspective, and what that meant is the solution was, first of all, it was acknowledged back then that we didn't know a lot and there would be changes. We acknowledged that we would have to do adaptive management. We also, one of the BiOp requirements was that actions in the BiOp needed to be biologically beneficial. They needed to be technically feasible, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we get into some of the specifics of the projects. They needed to be cost effective. And so when we were implementing the BiOp, these three things were important. This three-legged stool was important as we looked at the actions. We have current authorizations that we have to work within. We have, we must be avoiding the jeopardy of the species. And what we did was we had a process that was called the Configuration Operations Plan, or COP. And that was a process where we tried to take this three-legged stool analysis and then pick and make sure that the actions that we're accomplishing meet those three needs. The most benefit for the biggest bang for the least cost, and that it was feasible for us to do. So a little bit about that. So therefore, the BiOp, as was written, there were several short-term actions. There were some, we know things are that they're cost effective. We know that it'll provide biological benefit. Adult fish collection facilities. Let's implement those right away while we look longer term through this COP process about how do we best provide for downstream, what it came out to be, one of the biggest discussions is downstream passage for juvenile salmon. How do you get them past a dam that's 450 feet tall and the fluctuation of the pool goes plus or minus 160 feet? So that COP was very important to us. So if you look back to the life cycle of the fish, my oversimplification of some of the big things in it, first of all, some of the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit up front was upstream fish passage for adults. We had to rebuild, in some cases, renovate the upstream adult capture facilities. Cougar was already under work at the time of the BiOps, and through the BiOps, we needed to do the next four, Minto, Foster, Dexter, Fall Creek. The second part of the BiOp talked about the juveniles. We had to figure out how do we get juveniles downstream so they can go to the ocean, and come back, be trapped and hauled and brought up to the spawning habitat upstream. Primarily, this downstream passage for juveniles. Cougar, we already had started, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, a temperature control aspect, but we had to figure out how do we get the juvenile fish, because that's all part of fish passage. At Detroit, we need to worry about both the temperature and the fish passage, and then Lookout Point and the Middle Fork. And then the BiOp had downstream habitat improvements and things that we could do, and things about flow, temperature. Some of the things we could change right away. We were given targets as far as providing flows downstream when the fish are either hatching or when they're traveling back. And so we had temperatures. There's some cases we could control. At Cougar, you'll see we already had a temperature tower in place, a selective withdrawal structure that was already in place, so we could control temperature better at Cougar. Detroit, we started using operationally. What could we do while we planned longer term, more permanent solution? I'll talk more about those. And the fourth key part of the BiOps was the research, monitoring, and evaluation. At the time the BiOps were written, we didn't know a lot about fish passage, the details of how they go up and around, what happens in the above the dams, below the dams. And so therefore, we had to have a program that we could do research, monitoring, evaluation. And we've been averaging about $9 million a year. And I'm not sure if anyone in here are folks who contract out to do work for us. So we can learn about the fish to inform the implementation of the BiOp. And so the RM&E is a key component. And every year we have a science review where we bring all the scientists together and we have big presentations at Oregon State University. We talk about what was accomplished, et cetera. So that's an important part of this program. Then at the time the BiOp was written, there was the first guesstimate of what we thought the timeline would be. Okay? And as a lot of folks know, this timeline is different to today because as we learned about how do we answer these questions for downstream passage, some of the things took longer, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a few minutes. When I talked about the COP and how we did it, the bottom line is, again, it has the three-legged stool. We looked at 102 individual actions. We spread it across all the subbasins in different combinations, 3,400 combinations that we tried to look for the most cost-effective, biologically beneficial and feasible ways of providing for the needs of the fish. And that matter chart there is just to show the results kind of balancing what our estimated costs were to what the biological benefits were. And so we use this modeling process to pick and to go forward about how do we provide for, in particular, the juvenile downstream passage. What's the best way of providing that downstream passage? And so what we did and as a part of the BiOp, Cougar, we already had, as I mentioned, a temperature control tower in place. So then we said, yes, we need to do downstream passage, and I'll show you what that is in a few minutes as far as a floating structure to capture the fish. Detroit, we needed to provide passage. We don't have a temperature control. We were doing operational things, but we don't have a temperature control for permanent and long-term temperature control, so we have to build one of those and then also collect the juveniles. Lookout Point and the Middle Fork, one of the things that was challenging, the Middle Fork is extremely complicated. And since we have the others to do, what we need to do is do RM&E to ensure that we can answer that three-legged stool in the future. And so we created a specific focus program for RM&E on the Middle Fork to ensure that we can provide what is appropriate in the Middle Fork for downstream while we were implementing the first two. So that was the big four. Sometimes they're referred to, you hear folks talk about the big four. In 2015, we finished that COP. After sharing it regionally, and there were disagreements, there were folks, we got regional input on, there's a whole biological basis. We tried to get regional input and to make sure that what we were putting together and would be modeling the different actions, we tried to work. There weren't always agreements, but what we did come up with was the way forward I just described and a plan at the time. And we took this plan, the COP, and we briefed all the way up with a joint briefing between NIMS, us, BPA, up through the Corps headquarters to let folks know what we were doing, tried to lay out a plan. We've been implementing this plan since 2015. And how do we make it work? Because we got to remember we're making national funding decisions, and we needed the nation to know what those funding decisions are and why. And so we've been implementing this plan since 2015. And some of the projects you're going to see at Cougar and Detroit are the results of what this plan was. And I'll go through those in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. We have accomplished a lot so far. Are we there? No. Some of the things we have yet to do will provide bigger biological lift from the biologists and from you guys who know fish. But we have accomplished a lot. For instance, out of those 5 adult fish collection facilities, we've completed 4 of them, and they're operating today. We're just making final adjustments to a few, but they're operating today. I'll show you a few pictures here in a moment. Okay? We have made improvements out of 2 out of 4. Yeah, not the big 4 at Detroit and Cougar, but we have done work at Foster. We have a drawdown at Fall Creek to help for juvenile downstream passage. This is just a list of some of the things that we have done. And I'm very proud of what we have done so far as implementing the BiOp. Just for an example, if I go through FY18 and I look at FY18 alone, let me just point out what we did last fiscal year, because of course we're in fiscal year 19 right now. But in FY18, we had a total of $17.9 million. We had 14 projects. If I go by sub-basin, just to give you an idea, up on the North Santiam, in FY18, we are continuing forward on a design for Detroit juvenile passage at Detroit, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. We finished the Minto adult facility, which was the first one built, but we had to finish the as-built drawings in O&M so we could operate and maintain that facility into the future. We did a lot of RM&E on our interim temperature controls. In the South Santiam, we improved the fish weir for downstream passage at Foster and finishing up the adult fish collection facility as far as, again, as-built. It's operational, and now we're trying to look for improvements to make sure that the system operates the way it is designed. We also did a lot of RM&E. In the McKinsey Subbasin, the biggest work, and I'll talk in a minute about Cougar design and moving forward on this floating screen structure, and you'll see that off to the right there, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We also did research and monitoring in the McKinsey at Cougar. See that little floating thing on the left picture? That's called a PFFC, the Portable Floating Fish Collector. When we're trying to collect fish in a reservoir in a fluctuating pool at 160 feet, we needed to know as much as we could about how they react. And I'll talk more in a few minutes about that. But we also had this portable floating fish collector, which helped us learn about how fish actually react in the Cougar Reservoir. And then at the Middle Fork, I'm really proud we finished up Fall Creek Adult Fish Collection Facility, a neat facility. And this is pictures from the first day. You can see in the bottom left-hand what we caught the very first day. And it was really rewarding. And we learned from the prior fish collection facilities. So a neat project. And then we also, I mentioned that RM&E for the Middle Fork and work that we've done. And we have done work in the Middle Fork as far as RM&E last fiscal year. We've also looked at things system-wide. I was talking, I can't remember who I was talking beforehand about the fish in the Willamette. I'm not a biologist, but I have critters that live in their gills. And many of you probably know more. Copepods. And copepods live in the gill, and they're a parasite, and they make the fish. So that affects how the fish react as we're trying to catch them, capture them, and move them downstream or upstream. How do they react? So we've learned of these problems. We've learned that there may be, how do we help with that survival? So we're doing RM&E to look at copepods. We're also looking at, right now at these high head projects, we're looking at the possibility of, or right now we're looking at trapping juveniles, hauling them around. Can we do a bypass? Can these copepod fish, okay, but put them in a pipe and shoot them around the dam instead of having to handle. So we have a project going and working with, I know that ODF&W pushed this a lot as we were talking as far as making this, as looking at this, and can we do it in the future? So I've tried to talk a little bit about the Corps of Engineer history, the background of the Willamette projects, kind of a little bit about our work with the services on creating the BiOp, and then what the key aspects of the BiOp are and where we are today. There's one introduction that I did want to make when I was talking to the OM. Where's Eric? So for those of you who know and live in the Valley, Eric Peterson, right here, Eric, if you would please. Eric is our operations project manager for the Willamette Basin. And he and his team are responsible for operating and maintaining the 13 projects that I've been talking about. So if you have questions afterwards that want to know about the operations, Eric is your guy. Also, standing up in front, in case I pushed the button too many times, is Ian Chain. And Ian is our program manager for implementing the BiOp. And he is also program manager for implementing the BiOps on the Columbia portion. So Ian helps from a programmatic perspective. So if you have any specific questions, Ian would be your guy from the Corps to talk about the BiOps. So, Congressman, sir, that
Excellent.
makes my first.
No, it's excellent. Great job. Thank you, Kevin. So if you have questions on the mission of the Corps, and particularly how we got to this point that Kevin's outlined, please raise your card or tab up, and we will collect those, get them to the correct person, maybe Kevin.
Whoever you point to, I'll bring the mic.
All right. All right. Well, I'm going to take prerogative of being the convener of the meeting. Ask first question. And basically, a lot of this has been outlined, what the federal agencies have done collaboratively, trying to work together in hopefully a fairly seamless manner to get from point A to point B with the recovery. It's been delayed, but we've got another player, the state of Oregon, that's been integral to this process. So I wonder if we get Kurt maybe to talk a little bit about state's perspective on what's been going on so far.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And for the record, my name's Kurt Melcher. I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of familiar faces in the room. I think from our perspective, and of course, we've been both a cooperating agency as well as a collaborators with the federal agencies on all of these, what I would refer to as project-specific initiatives. We've also just, over the last 2 decades, really changed the way we do business in the basin. If you look at the way we've implemented fishery management reform regarding selective fishing for hatchery fish only in the basin, we've implemented a number of hatchery reforms to make sure that our hatchery programs, which are critical programs to us for the mitigation and the fisheries that they provide, but to make sure that those hatchery programs are not negatively impacting natural populations in the basin. Then I think, we've really taken the lead, and with, in particular, your help, Congressman Schrader, and many other folks in the room, as well as the entire Oregon Congressional Delegation, in addressing the sea lion predation threat, which is really, in the last decade, a new source of mortality in the basin, and one that we've taken very seriously, and really appreciate your work on that issue. And we stand ready in late 2019 and 2020 to fully implement a new program consistent with the legislation that you all just passed here recently. So I think, from our perspective, and I know I've said it before, of course, we're the Fish and Wildlife Agency, full disclosure. Our mission is to protect and enhance fish and wildlife and their habitat for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. We have our eye firmly on restoring these populations to sustainable levels that also provide for important cultural, social, economic benefits to the region. Our interest is not in just having simply museum-type populations in the basin, but actually having robust populations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. The first question is for Representative Schrader. Surprise, surprise. So protecting ESA-listed salmon and steelhead is likely to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Can we count on you to support such expenses? Answer is yes. I work really hard on that. This is a big deal for our region, and as Kurt referenced, the good news, in addition to preserving the salmon and steelhead runs with regard to the sea lion issue, we actually socialized the concerns of the Pacific Northwest with regard to salmon and steelhead to the rest of the United States Congress. So I think we're in a good position to make the case that, you remember we talked about how the salmon and steelhead are in big trouble in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you for your help with the sea lions, but it's going to cost money, obviously, to make sure that these runs are preserved. And so the good news of the work that this delegation did, the senators and the representatives, frankly, from not just Oregon, but Washington and Idaho, did a really good job. So I think we're in a really good position. There's no earmarks anymore, but there's a good position to make our case that this is just as important as the Great Lakes issues are for the folks in the Midwest, or the Chesapeake Bay for some of my folks back east. So we're now, I think, hopefully in a good position to make sure we can actually get that revenue that's going to be critical to support the good work that these gentlemen and ladies are doing up here. Second question. There are 13 dams that jeopardize salmon and steelhead, blocking prime spawning habitat, preventing or hindering up and downstream passage, fluctuations as much as 160 feet, temperature regimens, alter the hydrograph and nutrient loading. None of these dams are coming out, yet there was no mention of fishing mitigation or hatcheries in the purposes. Kevin, do you want to, or someone else want to jump in on that? Kevin took a break. Oh, there he is.
So thank you, sir. I will and then I'll ask my team to add in if anyone needs to, or actually maybe turn it over to Kurt or Bruce if there's anything, or to the fisheries guys. From the Corps' perspective, when the dams were built, we were given authorities and responsibilities, and continue today to have a mitigation responsibility. We realize that somewhere down in the future, when these things are working and when they are providing the benefits that we believe they will, then we will talk about whether that changes. In the meantime, we continue to execute the hatchery mitigation responsibilities that we have for when the dams were first built. And we will worry about the future when the future get here. So we continue to have the same requirements that we have had for hatcheries, and we'll continue to execute those as best we can for the future. So I don't know if any of my team want to add anything, or if, Kurt or Kim would like to add anything.
Well, I would just, thank you, Kevin. I would just add that we know that the mitigation commitment was a commitment to mitigate for lost fishing opportunity. And we obviously have a strong interest in continuing that mitigation until such time, Kevin, as you point out, that perhaps we have the natural runs restored. I think when you look at the basin, and I'll probably get my statistics off here a little bit, but I think like 90% of the salmon, in particular spring Chinook productivity, occurred above facilities, above dams now. 90% of the historic production. So, we've got, I'll just say this, as you mentioned, we've come a long way, and we recognize that. There's a lot of great things going on in the basin, but we feel like we're really just getting started. So.
Very good. Next question. Water is a critical component for agriculture, our municipalities, and fish and wildlife. Can we hold off on the allocation of our water resources? As you know, there's also a discussion about reallocation of water behind the dams going on, and it's probably integral to this process. So the question is, can we hold off on allocation of our water resources until an updated biological opinion is produced, so we can ensure the needs of our fish and wildlife are met? Who wants to? It's kind of what we're doing.
Sir, if you don't mind, and in fact, if the asker of that question, one of the things I'm going to talk about in the next segment is the Willamette Basin Review Reallocation Study, and then maybe, sir, we can address it then, if that's okay.
All right. So if your question isn't fully answered in the next stage, just bring it up again, and we'll go after that. And this one I can't read entirely. It says, how soon will the situation of the reservoirs begin to impact flood control, drawdowns, and temperature control? If I didn't get that right, please let me know.
I guess there's a couple of parts to that. One is we'll continue to operate the authorized purposes until we're told otherwise to change that. So as of right now, we'll continue to operate the dams the way we are operating them as per the authorized purpose. If you want to add anything on that, and then obviously any litigation or any injunction, then we'll obviously meet the intent of those laws at that time. But for right now, we'll continue to operate said per purpose.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is, as I mentioned earlier, the flood risk management is the primary consideration for these projects. And as we look at the operations, therefore, we need to ensure that we don't flood folks downstream. And that's one of the primary considerations of these projects.
All right, very good. Well, there's 3 more questions here. I think we got time for one. It says, let's see if I can make, no offense. First question, when the cost effectiveness of a project, does the Corps add in the economic impacts of the cities downstream when they're considering the cost effectiveness of a project? Loss of business, cost of funding alternative water sources, and offsetting loss of water from the river. How does that play out?
I guess I'll start with that, and I'll use Detroit as the example. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about Detroit, but the answer is yes. And there's been, and I'll use the example of a lot of very important public comment from different forums has come in. This has us go back and look very specifically, and there's additional information that comes out to look at all of that, which then will help determine which alternative or which direction that we take the construction or the project. And that's a good example where we're doing that now. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, of some of the things that has come to light and therefore caused us to take a deeper look. But that's all part of the scoping process. And if I missed anything there, but we do take that very seriously, and that's why we do this, the scoping process, part of NEPA specifically, is to look at those things.
And I will add that our office, along with the rest of the delegation, worked hard in the last appropriation cycle to write in language to make sure that mitigation was part of something that was part of the Corps' responsibility as we do some of this work going. So, all right, well, let's go on to the second phase of the presentation, if we can, Kevin. What is going on now?
Thank you, sir. So as mentioned, what we'd like to do is go on to ongoing federal operations from our perspective. There's 3 things that I would like to talk about. First of all, I provide an update on the juvenile passage and on the passage at Cougar and Detroit. And then I'll talk about the Willamette Basin review that we just had the question on. Before I do the Cougar and Detroit part, and again, my apologies, because I know that I'm guessing most folks are familiar, but just to make sure, as far as some base knowledge, when we have behind the projects and when they're originally constructed, as the projects sit through the summer, the pools warm up, and you have the warm water on the top and the cold water on the bottom. When the dams were originally constructed, there are limited number of passage points through a dam, and that makes a challenge. As you operate and we start drawing the pools down at the end of the summer, then that warm water is on top and you don't have as much cold, and there's a negative impact. You don't have the right temperatures going downstream. So with that, when I mentioned earlier that one of the BiOp immediate actions was how could we change operations, which we did at Detroit, where we could, whether it over a spillway or other of the few passage points for water, what we changed our operations was to try to mix the water to provide a better temperature downstream. And in fact, at Cougar, in a minute when I'll show you the temperature control tower that was put in 2005, when that went in, immediately after we started operating, adults made their way back as far as passage because it was the right, they didn't have that temperature block. And so we understand the importance of temperature, but we also understand there are limited ways of getting water around the project. So therefore, what the proposal is, just upstream, on the upstream side of the dam, if we put a tower that has multiple entrance points, Then throughout the year, then we can operate and get the right temperatures downstream to allow the juveniles and take care of those hatching, and also to allow adults to return. And so that's the idea behind the temperature tower portion of passage. When you're thinking of the little fish who are making their way through the pools as they are heading downstream at the beginning of the life cycle, when the dams were first built, one of the challenges, we have a lot of challenges when you have a 450-foot dam with 100 to 160-foot water fluctuation. Okay, the reservoirs are long. You have predators. I mentioned copepods earlier, and I like mentioning copepods only because I'm not a biologist, and I like to impress my biologist friends that I can say copepods. It really sounds, but there are copepods, parasites that we have to deal with. There are, when the dams were first built across the way, limited passage routes. You can see there's on the surface, if the water's high enough, you can spill over the spillway. Partially the way down, you have what are called regulating outlets, and they go out at the bottom of the spillway. You also have where you send the water through the turbines. So there are limited passage points, and unfortunately, some of these intakes are very deep. The juveniles swim at the surface. So as you're lowering the pool or raising the pool, depending on the time of the year, you have to be able to get the juveniles because they swim at the surface. We didn't know a lot about fish movement in the reservoirs from when they were hatched upstream and where they went. RM&E, research monitoring evaluation, was very important. Using these facilities for passage, those fish that we could pass through these facilities had very high mortality. Going through over a spillway, a 450-foot drop through a water slide is not something little fish do well at. We also have the large fluctuations I've mentioned, and then so the question is, what is the best bang for the buck? How can we ensure biological benefits? How can we ensure that they are feasible and that we pick the most cost-effective way forward? So with that, as a little bit of background, the solution then that we kind of in general come up with, and this is schematics to give you an idea, you can see on that dam, we're on the upstream face of it. You know, the first thing is you have that temperature control tower that I was talking about for the change of the temperature, and then you have the little blue thing, the floating screen structure. That will go up and down with the reservoir with the idea of capturing juvenile salmon at the surface. And then if necessary, is there a way to make sure that the fish can find it? If necessary in the future, do you have to put guide nets? I'm joking here. I gotta say that since I'm really not funny, but my non-joking, I tell the biologists that what I think we just need to put is neon signs with arrows, so that way the fish know which way to go. But you gotta collect them in that floating screen structure and bring them around the dam. We are learning, there are other projects in the Pacific Northwest. And because of the complexity of this, we are working very hard to learn from those other projects. Our teams have gone out multiple times. We work with our partners at NIMS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, ODF&W, BPA, to bring the best available science to help resolve some of the challenges that we face. But the Willamette Valley is a challenging project for us to ensure that we can capture those fish in the conditions and safely get them around the dam. So as I mentioned, primarily right now we're working on Cougar and Detroit, and we're making plans, or we're doing the research monitoring evaluation to help set the stage for the Middle Fork. At Cougar, already built in 2005 is a temperature control tower. So the project that I'm going to talk about now is the second phase, which is capturing those juvenile salmon. And then I'll talk about Detroit. When I look at Cougar, first of all, let me introduce Chris Budeye. Chris is right here. Oh, you gotta hold your hand up, Chris, so folks can see you. Chris is the project manager for the Cougar project. And so therefore, afterwards, if you have questions about this, please contact Chris and talk with Chris about the project. But as mentioned, that's a picture of the temperature control tower, and you can see where it's located, and I'll show you that closer up. It was finished in 2005, and then that's an old photo in the middle, but where the arrow points, we completed a new adult collection facility in 2010. So now we have to provide the last part of it, which is that juvenile collection and getting the juveniles around Cougar Dam. To give you an idea, a little bit more about what we're looking at right now is you can see the temperature control tower. Again, to give you a sensing, if you look closely on this or the picture that you have, you can see some construction equipment in yellow just at the bottom right of the temperature control tower, or the SW, the selective withdrawal structure. And what we're planning right now, we think, is a floating screen structure, which shows just off to the side there, and that will float up and down, have enough flows to capture the juveniles. Right now, the plan is to capture them in a tank, bring the tank around, and go downstream and let them continue their trip to the ocean. We're also looking at, across the board, can we someday in the future provide for a super slide tunnel that they would be able to go past the dam? Will they survive that? We're doing some R&E and looking at that, whether we can do that. One of the things I know when I get to my slide 70, whatever at the end, and talks about public involvement, I'd like to point out we are currently in the NEPA review process, and we believe that we will be doing an environmental assessment, looking at the impacts of doing this project, and the public comment period will start on or about the 11th of March. So you all can provide comments on our proposed project. So we'll be sharing that and then looking for public comment period. So that's one opportunity that you have to provide us input as we look at moving forward, if this is the right way to go forward. So that gives you a picture of kind of what we're thinking. As mentioned, the challenge is, and Mother Nature has a vote, those fish, when they come up and get to the collector, they approach, they discover where the flow is, but my non-biology understanding is when they get to that point of decision, if you don't have enough capture, until you can get enough capture velocity, they can decide this doesn't feel right and go the other way. So this part is a critical portion of the whole collection process for juveniles. We're using, as mentioned, lesson learned. We did RM&E, that portable floating fish collector I talked about. We are working with our partners trying to get input, and especially important, our KIMS guys and gals from NIMS, the Science Center, and the folks that are helping us with it, because they have experience with this elsewhere. So we're trying to get help in the design. We're using the Corps Marine Design Center because that thing that I was talking about, and I'm not sure how big it is compared to this room, but it's got to float. It's got to be a boat and go up and down. So we're working with the Corps Marine Design Center to ensure that it will be buoyant and balanced as it goes up and down, and that it can handle those flows. We are just now starting modeling up in Washington and Everett. There's a company that's putting together a physical model of what we're proposing. So we can check to make sure our calculations are correct, that we think we will provide the correct flows for the fish to capture them. And one of the things we have at Cougar is, this is Kevin's word, we have a cul-de-sac advantage. And what that means is, if you look at the top picture on the left, you can see where the temperature control tower is, or from the map, you can see where it is. Well, that little corner there is something that we refer to as the cul-de-sac. And if I zoom in on what that looks like, you can see the kind of purplish color is the cul-de-sac. You can see where the existing temperature tower is. You can see we're proposing that FSS would go. And right now, the way the fish normally go, because that's the flow, most of the fish tend to go that way. And I'm not going to pretend to know numbers. I do know that Kim has told us, action agencies, that for the fish that get into that cul-de-sac, we've got to collect 95% of them to be able to move them downstream. Okay? But we do have this cul-de-sac, my words, advantage, and those, by the way, are not proportionally sized fish. My guys are telling me that we're not capturing whales. So that's at Cougar. The current schedule for Cougar, as I mentioned, on 11th March, we'll share our environmental assessment. Currently, Chris and her team are on schedule to just under a year and a half from now of issuing the construction contract for that project. So that's the current schedule that we're on, and it's an extremely tight, getting the Marine Design Center, that modeling I was talking about, dealing with adjusting it so that in the future we might be able to add that super slide. It's very, very challenging project, but Chris and her team are here, and Chris is here, and she can talk to you about what her and her team are doing. But roughly a year and a half, just under a year and a half from now is when we'll be hopefully issuing that contract. So I'm going to switch now to Detroit, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeff Ammett. Jeff is right there. Jeff is the project manager for the Detroit project. Some of you may have been at a meeting when Jeff presented on Detroit. And let me kind of tell the story of where we are. Just I thought, an interesting photo, the first bucket of concrete at Detroit Dam in 1950. The picture on the bottom left is from the upstream side, looking at the upstream face of the dam. And you can see where the holes are. And when I talk about limited, especially up and down, there are limited access points to get the different temperatures. What we're planning to put on this upstream side, though, is shown on the right diagram. And I just wanted to give you a flavor of what we're trying to build. That temperature tower at Detroit, compared to the Moda building if you're downtown Portland, and that floating screen structure, the current plan is, we're thinking it's going to be about the size of a football field to be able to float and go up and down and capture the juvenile salmon. One of the things that, so therefore this is just a schematic. The bottom left shows you kind of the blue again on the map, shows you where that selective withdrawal structure will be, and then the pinkish color is the floating screen structure. And then on top is a cartoon of what we think that will, our original thoughts on what we were going to design for that. And I'll say original thoughts because of what we heard during the public process. And some of the questions, I know the concerns, the question about the economics and the impact downstream through the NEPA process, we heard things. But that was our current plan, and that the purple would go up and down, the FSS would go up and down. And but as I was mentioning, we did, through the NEPA process, went out with that plan and got public comment. And this was Jeff briefed, 198 comment correspondences that we've got. The summary of that, one of the key things we learned was the impact. That drawing that I showed you with the tower away from the dam and the FSS, that our original thoughts. The easiest and cheapest way to build that is in the dry. Drain the pool, build it in the dry, and so you miss a year of cycle. The economics question, it affects recreation in Detroit, get it. It also, we have learned, affects the water supply of Salem and other communities downstream. So now we had, and exactly in my view, the way this public process is supposed to work, getting this feedback to make us better informed as we make decisions going forward. So with that feedback, we're going back to the drawing board. The right-hand side kind of gives our thoughts about what we were with the in the dry construction. What we're now looking at is actually flip-flopping the SWS and the FSS. And the map on the side, on the bottom, shows you that the blue box is now up next to the dam. The reason we stayed away from that originally is because if you're going to hang something on the side of the dam, something that huge, the weight on the side of the dam, we have to make sure that it's safe, right? And so therefore it makes it more complicated hanging something on the side of the dam. However, the one thing that's cool about this possible structure, and so what we're looking at, here's a picture of that temperature control tower next to the dam, because we're exploring, can we build this thing in the wet? And if you can build it in the wet from the top down, attaching and moving things as you go down, then you don't have to draw the pool down, you don't affect the water supply of Salem, you also don't affect the recreation. Can you do that? So we're looking at that. And if you did this model, then on the outside is where you would put that floating screen structure that would go up to catch the salmon. Like anything, there's advantages and disadvantages of all of it. This is what we're exploring now as whether it's actually feasible, but we are looking at this possible in wet construction. With that said, there is going to be more coming out because we had already gone through the public scoping meetings, et cetera, with the impact I already talked about. We are now drafting our environmental impact statement, looking at these other possible construction methods. That draft EIS is currently scheduled to be out in late May. So therefore, May, June, July, there will be a chance, and I'll summarize this at the end, for public input on our draft EIS for the Detroit project. And as mentioned, Jeff is in the back if there are specific questions afterwards that you would like to talk about. So that's Cougar in Detroit. Now I'd like to transition into a reallocation study that we're doing in the Willamette Valley. Its title is the Willamette Basin Review Reallocation Study. And as mentioned way up front when I was talking about our funding, and we're part of the Energy and Water Bill, we have investigations, construction, O&M. Under investigations, this is the one study that we have funded in the Willamette Valley, that we're looking at the allocation behind the dams. The purpose of the study is to evaluate the reallocation. There's about 1.6 million acre feet of storage available behind the Willamette projects. About 1.6 million acre feet available of storage. So what we're doing through this study is evaluating what is the appropriate reallocation of what right now is all joint use storage. How should it be reallocated to municipal and industrial? How should it be reallocated to irrigation? And how should it be reallocated to ensure that we have the water for fish and wildlife? That's the purpose. This is an old project. The authority is tied to the original constructions of the dam, but in 1988, we received an authority to do this study. Now, 1988, and also by doing this study on the fish and wildlife, I just grew that bullet on the bottom, is that this also, completion of this report, supports one of the actions in the RPA for the 2008 BiOp. So, authorized in 88, we get appropriations, we start the process. The question had to do with, does it make sense to stop this waiting for the EIS? Well, actually, in 2000, we did, in concert with our partners and with the others, we did stop the study in 2000. In fact, in this case, Doug is here from OWRD as far as our non-federal sponsor for this study. And Doug and OW have been a great sponsor as we've been moving this project forward. But it was stopped waiting the 2008 BiOp. And it was stopped just for the reason of the question. So then in 2008, we got the biological opinions. We did our assessment. We got the biological opinions. Doug and his folks published an integrated water resource strategy for the state. And then we ended up getting we signed a new cost share agreement and restarted the project, got the appropriations, and restarted the project in 2015. Now, one of the things that the Corps is really trying to put, from the district perspective, we're getting pressure, but appropriately so. One of the things that the Corps is trying to do is say, hey, when we get these studies, we need to get them, get the money for it, then complete the study in 3 years, and then be done with it. And the idea is to start and stop so you can get to the next studies. In the past, in decades, these studies would go on for years and never come to conclusion. And so one of the neat changes that the Corps is doing is once you start a study, you have to stop. Or get it done, rather. Not decide, you have to get it done. 2015, we started the project again. 2015 plus 3 years is 2018. And what that schedule looks like is shown here. In 2015, we signed the cost share agreement. As you go down, you can see the different steps to include, a tentatively selected plans, outreach, stakeholder meetings, moving all the way down to September of 2018 with the results that we have. We reinitiated formal consultation with Kim at NIMS and NIMS. We had planned with that consultation starting in September, we were jointly working towards finishing the study by March of 2018. And we had requested that March be the approval date up from the Assistant Secretary of the Army and got approval. So currently, our date is, I think it's 6 March, is that right? 6 March is what our current date is. We have also heard about the government shutdown. NIMS did not, during the shutdown, did not have funds to move forward on the studies. And they were one of the agencies that did not have a continuation of their appropriations. So therefore, that date was affected. We are now in the process of working with NIMS. When can they get it done as they've restarted? And when will our finish be? And we're going to have to go back and request another extension to that date. But hopefully we will get that extension to finish up the project. To give you a picture of what we're consulting on and what's in our biological assessment, behind our dams, the 1.6 million acre feet, you remember that, part of the process of the study was to identify what the future needs are. And this shows what those the needs are for the fish and wildlife, M&I, and irrigation for agriculture. And I know some of you in the room here have been great help as far as stakeholders helping us work through this process. But you can also see that the total future needs in 2070 is 2.07 million acre feet. We ain't got that much. We only have 1.59 million acre feet, 1.6 million. So part of the study was, what is the appropriate breakout between those? And so that is what we are consulting with NIMS on. These are the conclusions that we drew, and what that looks like for that 2.07 need is what we're consulting on, is that fish and wildlife would have 1.1 million acre feet of storage set aside. M&I would have just under 160,000 acre feet, and ag irrigation 327.7 thousand acre feet. That's what we're consulting on. In the consultation, though, and getting to the question that was asked earlier, the question was, well, wait a minute, why don't you stop this study until you're going to be reconsulting? And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Why don't you stop the study? Well, first of all, we're at the end of that 3-year process as far as coming up to a study. There is an acknowledgement that in the reconsultation and looking to the future, these numbers might change. However, from my perspective, one of the assumptions is they're going to change likely on the margins, and going back and re-looking at what the numbers are on the margins and looking whether we have to change is much easier than getting a whole new start study and say, yeah, we didn't make it. And so from a decision-making authority of trying to get the authority, making sure the authority is still good and that we can get the appropriations to do it, we need to finish up the study. And so therefore, because of looking to the future and understanding, one of the things in the consultation that we have with NIMS is that we, first of all, that this project, if completed, would first of all help us start meeting the needs of that RPA 2 point whatever it was as part of the BiOp. We also said, hey NIMS, because we're going to probably relook this under the new consultation, we are going to limit the access for M&I users to 43,650. So of that 160,000, you can only get water contracts for 43. We think in the time that we're going to be doing the BiOp that is a reasonable number, and we've worked that with stakeholders. And the 2008 BiOp limits the amount of water that can be contracted for, if you will, to 95,000 acre feet in 2008 BiOp. That will continue until we finish the reconsultation, the big reconsultation. So this is what we're moving forward. We are in consultation with NIMS. We sent a biological assessment for NIMS consultation. We had a disagreement with the conclusions. We came to then working back and forth on that, and formal consultation began in September. This is being delayed by the lapse in NIMS funding. So we have, although we currently have a waiver that goes through March 5th, we are going to be requesting another waiver to kick it back to give us time to finish the consultation with NIMS. I failed to mention that our project manager for this project is Lori Nicholas. Miss Lori is there in the back with the teal sweater. So if you have any questions, is that teal? Is that close enough? Okay. That sweater, Lori is an expert on this and would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So, sir, we've gone to phase 2 and have finished the overview of ongoing work, the 3 projects, Cougar, Detroit, as far as downstream passage, and then the Willamette Basin Review reallocation study. Sir.
Excellent, excellent. We've got some other folks here that, as Kevin's alluded to, have play into this discussion. And I guess for Kieran, I'd open up with a question. If the power generation of these projects doesn't or didn't need to be preserved, are there other alternatives that could be considered? And what would that mean for water stored behind the dams?
Thank you, sir. Maybe I'll start off and introduce myself in case folks aren't familiar with Bonneville. The Bonneville Power Administration markets the power from 31 federal dams here in the 4-state region. I'm sitting in the perfect spot because those dams are the Corps' dams and the Bureau of Reclamation's dams, but our mission is to market the power from those, or at least our most well-known mission is to do that. By statute, we also fund other missions such as fish and wildlife mitigation, energy conservation programs, and benefits to residential and small farm consumers. For folks like me who are customers of Pacific Core or Portland General Electric, if you've ever looked at the back of your electric bill, there's very cryptic language on there, and there's a tiny line item in really small print that has a negative number on your bill, and that's dollars that come from the Bonneville Power Administration to lower your bills a little bit. Because we are self-funded through our ratepayers, we're always looking at our cost structure and trying to figure out how we can continue to deliver those missions. And the question, Congressman, it's a little bit alien for me and for Kevin, because as we've all mentioned, our focus tends to be how can we do it all? How can we deliver on our missions and meet our biological obligations under ESA? But our customers and the delegation have been asking that very question. Could fish, the taxpayer and the ratepayer, be better off if that mission were removed? And, the high-level answer is that in any complex environment like the one Kevin has spent a lot of time here explaining, if you can remove one of the constraints or one of the obligations, it may open up new possibilities. But in this situation, of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. But with the rising cost to the ratepayer, the benefits of these resources to that primary mission are shrinking, right? The ability of Willamette Valley projects to provide low-cost power is going down with these missions. To the second half of your question, and I'll hand it off to the other folks here who know more about this than I do. Hydropower doesn't consume water, but it does impact how water moves through a facility like the dams in the Willamette Valley. The turbine outlets are a major way that water moves through the system, and operations for power influence how water moves through the system. And that can either be beneficial or challenging to the other multi-purpose missions that the Corps talks about. And so we are, given reinitiation, given all of the NEPA processes going on, the Corps and Bonneville are beginning to look at, hey, so are there some other possibilities here? In addition to the primary mission that we've all been focused on here, which is the question of executing on the plan that we have today. And I know Kevin or others, if you want to add to that.
I'll jump on again. Thank you, Kieran, for that. So it is, as Kevin mentioned, it is fairly complicated. So we are given authorized purposes, and they're authorized in a bill that says this facility will do these purposes. And just for example, You look at all of ours, there's a number of different purposes. We've got hydropower, navigation, flood, recreation, there's storage. Some of the dams are re-regulation. We have fish mitigation, part of the environmental. So there's a number of different purposes that each one of these dams do. So for a change in a purpose, it would have to be, Congress would have to give us a change in purpose, and therefore then something they could potentially, if they chose to pull out, then we say, okay, we still have a facility that was designed for it. Does someone take over the hydropower? But the dam is built, so you can't just change it, on the fly. So there's a whole lot of things that would have to happen to change a purpose of some of the projects. Some are more complicated than others. Some have one or two purposes. Some have multiple purposes. So there's a whole lot of things that have to be studied, and then you have to look at the pluses, the costs. There's going to be some benefits, but there's also going to be some costs or some negatives to potentially taking some action. Now, will it change cost allocation? Absolutely. So those are all the things that have to get looked at if you were to change a purpose of one of the projects. So I'll leave it at that it is a complicated equation, and I'll talk a little bit more about why, but and Kevin will get to some of that in the third part. But when you look at what the purpose of the dams are, right now, we'll continue to operate the dams in the purpose that they were designed for, based on our authorities that we've been given through congressional bills.
And, oh,
Kevin.
Yeah, I guess my answer from no would be is it depends. So if the power is no longer an authorized purpose of one of the dams, if the primary impacts on our species has to do with passage, water quality, and in-stream flows, to the degree that the loss of that, removal of that authorization changes how the dams are operated that affect any one of those, then that opens up some flexibility in terms of what we would be looking for and the potential benefit. So it depends on how the resultant operation of those structures.
Makes sense.
and sir, if you don't, just to tie those comments together, is how that's working with the practical aspect of it. As I mentioned, Chris and her team is currently on, and per the BiOp in the agreement, we have a year and a half from now, just under a year and a half from now, we're supposed to be issuing the construction contract. And so what we need to do is, what I didn't show when I showed that, when I showed the rule curve, thank you. When I showed the rule curve and they had the bottom numbers on the left and right, that is roughly about where there's something called a power pool, where we have to maintain that amount of pool in the lakes to meet our hydropower mission. We have to maintain that amount set aside for power. Now, if in fact we were deauthorized for hydropower, then in theory that takes that low number away. So while we are continuing on implementing the BiOp that we have now, on the schedule that we have promised and the plan that we have, one of the things now, this has raised a new question about, are there any silver bullets if in fact you did remove that power pool? Are there other methods at Cougar that we could provide for more efficient, more cost-effective passage? It's there. We looked at it on the back of an envelope in the last couple of months, and if going into it's a whole interesting thing as far as where are those current outlets, what would you have to do to them, how do you make them big? There is no silver bullet on the first look. There is nothing that we know of that says, yes, if you remove it, we have an easier, cheaper way of passing. There may be some alternatives. And so we still have a requirement. We're moving forward on the current plan. And now parallel to, before Chris and we hit, our contracting officer signs a contract in a year and a half, we need to wrestle with this question to see if there is anything that could be better, more cost effective. And if so, work with our partners at BPA and NIMS to say, yeah, there is, if there is, or no, there's not. And if whatever the answer is, then what? So we are starting in a parallel path look at, would this provide us any other options?
And as part of that, they look at all of the options. So there's risk, and some of the things they'll look at is the risk of operating a large earthen dam, and if you draw it down, and what are the impacts? And there's a matrix that shows what happens if. So all that stuff will get looked at as part of this to make sure that as you go down a particular alternative, that we don't put obviously population at risk or create things that have more benefit than positive.
All right, so gonna try and get Water Resources Department engaged here because they're a big player in this discussion. They're the ones that actually have the agreement in terms of the irrigation, how much coming out, that 90 or plus. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, Doug.
Be happy to, thank you. To introduce myself, I'm Doug Woodcock, Deputy Director for Oregon Water Resources Department. And Oregon Water Resources Department is the water quantity agency. And we manage water supplies around the state through what we call our Water Master Corps. So we have 21 water masters across the state, and they are responsible for managing the water rights, the water distribution and regulation in the streams around the state. And so just to talk a little bit about how that's done, I'm going to talk a little bit about what water rights are and how they work. So when you want to use water beneficially in the state of Oregon, with some exceptions, you have to get a water right to do that. And a water right is an authorization that has several components to it. It has a source of water. It identifies where that point of diversion, if that's what you're doing, diverting the water from the stream. It has a location of where that diversion is. It has a place of use, where that water source is going to be applied. It has a type of use, so whether you're going to use it for industrial or you're going to use it for irrigation. And then importantly, it has a priority date. So a priority date is the date when you are applying for that use of water. Priority date is very, very important when it comes to managing the water resources. The water master responds to a call from water users, and the water masters are also out measuring the stream flows along with department hydrographers, measuring the stream flows to see how the flows are doing at any given time. If a senior user, if an out-of-stream diverter, consumptive user is short of water, they can make a call for their water. They would contact the water master, and the water master would validate that call, determine that in fact they are short of their entitled amount of water per their water right. And then if that is in fact validated, then the water master would begin to look to see what junior users are upstream of that user that would be regulated off to get water down to that senior user. This is called prior appropriation. Oregon is a prior appropriation state. That is, the senior users get the water during times of shortage. And so the water master then is looking to see all of the junior users upstream that could be regulated to satisfy that senior user downstream. And this regulation generally starts upstream and works their way down, and constantly looking to see whether that water right is being satisfied. And once it is satisfied, then the water master will go back and adjust as necessary. But it's all done by priority date. It's not done by the type of use. We don't distinguish one use as having a priority over another. It's all done by priority date. Now, I was talking about out-of-stream uses there when the water master is regulating. Water master also regulates for in-stream water rights. So those are water rights that are held by the state of Oregon. They also have a priority date. Water master is out measuring to see whether the in-stream water rights are met. If they are not met, then the same process applies. The water master is going to work their way upstream, and they're going to turn off all of the junior water rights to that more senior in-stream water rights, again to satisfy that senior water right, which would be the in-stream in this particular example.
All right.
Different years, I'll just add one thing. Every year is different. As you know, we'll have, I would look at this year, look at how dry January was, now look at February. Are we going to continue to see this progress into the spring, or are we just going to, is the tap going to turn off? We're watching that very closely, and that will affect how the water is managed during the season. And so during extremely dry years, then that regulation cuts much deeper into those water rights as to who is used to taking water, because the flow is not there to satisfy all of the rights. So during, in any given basin around the state, this is a long ongoing process where people generally know where they fit in the pecking order with their water right. They know that they'll get through June with their water, but after June, they can't count on it anymore. They'll be regulated off. Well, depending upon what type of year we have, that can fluctuate significantly.
Very good. All right, we got lots of questions here. I don't think we'll get them all probably handled right now, but we will try and get these to the appropriate people and get them back to you. So if your question isn't answered, make sure you check in with Suzanne or Megan so we know who to get back to for responding to the questions, because they don't necessarily have names on here. All right, first question, good question. You know, if NIFS does not provide, and it's probably not just NIFS, but if there is not a practical alternative to reallocate stored water to municipalities and industrial use, will that stop the reallocation, or will there be an effort to override ESA protections for fish? And I don't know if, Kim, you want to take, I'll take a shot at it too, but Kim,
You want to go first?
I'd rather go after you.
So if I understood the question correctly, under the Endangered Species Act, the Action Agency brings us an action that they have determined will avoid jeopardizing the species or adversely modifying its critical habitat. So the action that we've been given by the Corps of Engineers is this reallocation of storage in the Willamette Basin. So our obligation under the ESA is to evaluate the impact of that action on listed species. And at the conclusion of that, we will either determine through consultation that action can move forward without jeopardizing or adversely modifying the critical habitat of those species, or if we find that it does not meet that threshold, like the initial 2008 BiOp that Kevin mentioned, that it's our obligation to develop with the Action Agency a reasonable and prudent alternative, which the reasonable and prudent alternative meets three criteria. It avoids jeopardizing and adversely modifying the critical habitat. It allows the Action Agency to proceed with the action as intended to meet its objectives, and it needs to be technically and economically feasible. So if I understood the question, we don't have an off-ramp here. We have to complete the consultation, and we will either complete it with a consultation that is not a reasonable and prudent alternative, or it is a reasonable and does have a reasonable and prudent alternative that we offer to the action agencies.
Good answer, and I think that Kim hit on, if you disagree with some of the practical alternatives out there, your job would be to show that it's not prudent or feasible in your mind based on some studies, some information that you've been able to gather that maybe is not available to some of the folks up here at this point in time. My sense, frankly, from the United States Congress perspective, and I don't want to speak necessarily for all my colleagues, but I don't think because of the 2008 BiOp, we are not in a position to stop reallocation. That will happen. And the question is, right now, or do we go through this more informed process so that we have a better shape of the uniforce before we do that? I'm hoping, based on what I'm hearing here from the experts, that it will be the latter. And we'll have an opportunity to weigh in during the public comment period about some of the alternatives, the draft EIS that's coming out here at this point in time. I find it highly unlikely that there'll be a movement in Congress to do away with the ESA requirements. I just don't think that's going to happen at the end of the day. So I'd like my focus, to be honest with everybody here, including the folks at this table, is that as we leave this room, that we're in a more collaborative spirit, and that there's an opportunity to play significantly in a very granular approach to how this water is allocated, so that everybody, frankly, is going to have to give a little. That's just the real world. And everybody's going to also gain a little at the same day. same time, and hopefully put some certainty, as much as you can with climate change going on, put some certainty into our lives going forward. So it's going to be an iterative process for all of us here, and it's going to require everybody's engagement, I think, forward. I didn't say anything illegal, did I? Okay. On the second question here, is there any way the reallocation can provide certainty that water will be available for farms or communities in the face of the ESA consultation? And I don't think anyone want to jump on that. I don't think you can. There's not absolute certainty, but if we can come up with a framework at some point, I think everyone will have a much better understanding of what happens when there's low water years, how that affects your farm, how that affects your city. And I would like to see the cities, farms, fish and wildlife people, everyone accept a little responsibility for maybe engaging in a thoughtful reevaluation of how they're currently doing things. Can they be part of the solution long-term, given the water variability that we're currently seeing? It's probably only going to get a little tougher. Kevin, do you have a comment?
So the only thing that I would add is that one of the bullets I didn't talk about when I put the Willamette Basin Review up there, the reallocation study up there, was one of the things that we are consulting with NIMS on is our current action is that in low water years, we would quote unquote share the pain, and in how we would balance the different when you don't have enough water. And that's one of the things we're consulting how to handle low years.
Great. Next question is, can the comment period for the Detroit Fish Passage EIS and Willamette reallocation be a minimum of at least 90 days? This is going to be pretty complicated stuff. What control do we have over that?
No, the question is the comment period for the Detroit Fish Passage, can it be extended out to 90 days?
So, thank you, sir. I'm so sorry. My mic I didn't think was working. We're not checking. Real quick, as far as the comment, right now, our normal, the requirement is 45 days. We know that there's lots of interest. At this point, our plan right now is that we will have a 60-day comment period. And the intent, because we do want to make sure that we are moving forward, we have a timeline as far as that. So therefore, executing the project at Detroit. So therefore, the desire is not to extend it. I know that we have in the past. We would rather not.
It's complicated.
Oh, you still can't hear?
No.
Someone's giving me Should I repeat that, sir?
I've got it. If everybody can hear me. So the comment period is typically 45. I think we're planning for 60, but the intent is to complete the comment period 60 because we want to move forward. And obviously there's always extenuating circumstances or some changes that we've had in the past, but the target right now is to do it within those 60 days. So.
And I'll just say, from Congress's standpoint, it's not uncommon for your delegation to work closely with the Corps and NIMS and others to maybe extend that to 90 days if there's a problem with getting your work done. Because it's tough to they're spending a lot of time developing the proposal. You want to have adequate time to at least review the proposal, and it's going to take a lot of work on your part. So we'll work closely with everybody out there and with our partners just to make sure everyone feels comfortable with the comment period. When was the last time a flood risk management study was authorized? And does the current flood risk of the Willamette Basin take into consideration the increase in climate temperatures in the last years? Any takers on that one? First part, anyway.
I think we need to get back on that one. Okay. I'm not sure the last flood risk study. I know we're doing some in the Columbia River, but I'm not familiar or can give you a firm answer at this time.
So we'll get back to you. Make sure you identify yourself with our team, and we'll get that information to you. I guess this is fair. Freshwater mussels and Pacific lamprey are part of the ecosystem in the Willamette Basin, essential to salmon and steelhead recovery by way of sea lion predation, nutrient infusion, and water filtration, to name a few. Will Pacific lamprey and freshwater mussels, both are unlisted, but essential, be part of this BiOp at all? Are they addressed in the BiOp?
Not by NOAA. just because they're not our trust resources. So I don't know whether Fish and Wildlife are, but they're not listed, so no, they won't. But, I will point out that from my standpoint anyway, salmon are sort of keystone species, and what we're looking for is to try to restore and sustain those ecosystem elements that indicate viable, healthy ecosystems. So rather than this biological opinion being focused solely on endangered salmon species, we think that we can arrive successfully at an action that results in healthy, viable, sustainable ecosystems and all of the aquatic species which depend on them. So they are not going to be named per se, but they should be addressed.
Good answer. Last question, I guess, and there's a boatload more, and like I said, please identify yourself so we can get the answers to you. How is siltation in the reservoirs factored into the allocations and estimates, and can siltation be managed?
I think, and I might call for a lifeline on siltation here and ask Lori Nicholas to, because the bottom line is I think it's negligible within the pools, and it will not affect the amount of storage available. But Lori, is there anything we should add to that?
Correct. We've been doing surveys of the reservoirs over probably the last decade and updating our storage curves, and the difference is very negligible. It's not a major problem in this part of the country like you would see in Willamette.
So if you didn't hear that, they have considered that. They've done some studies, and to their knowledge, it's not as big an issue, if at all, frankly, in our water sources compared to, say, the Mississippi River and other places back east where they have a much greater issue with that. So if you disagree, please contact that individual and get some more information. All right, well, we need to move on, I'm afraid. Kevin, you want to launch into presentation number 3?
Yes, sir. So for the third portion, there's two things I'm going to talk and put the two kind of intertwined. But I do want to talk about what we're doing as far as an environmental impact statement and looking at the operations of the dam, and then also tied into the reinitiation of consultation that I mentioned on that 2008 BiOp and that we spoke of earlier. As far as the environmental impact statement that we are working, first of all, since the last EIS, operations in the Willamette Valley have changed quite a bit. There has been structural improvements, and we have changed operations quite a bit. We also have new information available, new information biologically, and we have a lot of new information available through the research management, RME, research, monitoring, and evaluation that we have done in implementing the 2008 BiOp. So therefore, because of these reasons, we are going through, and tied to that, we then have requested reinitiation of the 2008 biological opinion with NIMS. And so now we're in the process of using the EIS to move forward and getting public information to make decisions about the status of the valley, to create a biological assessment, which then, using the EIS, NEPA, which is a transparency process to make sure that we get input, to balance that then with what do we need to do and what action do we need to propose as far as ESA consultation and continuing forward with protecting and not jeopardizing the species, and what improvements do we need to make with the 2008 BiOp. So those two processes are moving forward in concert. On the right is a timeline in the little box there as far as where we are on the EIS process. So let me try to explain those kind of quickly because they're related, but different processes. In April of last year, we came to the conclusion that we needed to reinitiate consultation. We have done that and have sent that letter to Kim for reinitiating that consultation. In the meanwhile, we are then starting, okay, as we prepare for that reinitiation, what does it mean for how we operate the project and what the Willamette Valley project, and what do we need to do for the future? And so therefore, we are starting the public scoping process to get public input to inform us as we write our biological assessment, which we will then send to NIMS to consult on. So you can see, for instance, on the EIS sideline, in March of this year, our schedule is to provide the notice of intent publication in the Federal Register. And where is Susie? In the back, Miss Susie Hill with the yellow scarf, the gold scarf, is our expert here today as far as the EIS process, and she can answer questions afterwards. But we will, in March, have the notice of intent. We will then have, through March through June, a series of public scoping meetings. Excuse me. And through those public scoping meetings, we will receive public comment on things that we should be considering as we prepare our biological assessment in preparation for the reconsultation with NIMS. That scoping period will go from May through June of 2019. And right now, our current schedule is to use that information to, in the spring of 2021, come together with a biological assessment that we will send to NIMS. And Susie, be ready. I might be calling you up here because I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry. With submitting that BA to NIMS in the spring of 2021. Then we will work that biological assessment with NIMS to come up with, as Kim described earlier, NIMS will write a biological opinion. With that biological opinion, then we will produce a draft EIS. In that draft EIS, we will then again be looking for public comment when we get to 2023, and then sign a record of decision on what we're going to do in the valley. And Kim, although I was going to highlight, would you please talk a little bit about your charts here, as far as what also from the NIMS perspective on our reinitiation of biological opinion?
Oh, I have complete confidence in you, Kevin.
Yeah, I don't.
So this is just a follow-on, because this is a lead-in from the reinitiation of the 2008 BiOp, and the earlier slide in the presentation Kevin referenced basically the status of the species in the baseline in 2008. And there were 2 species that were directly impacted in the Willamette and 11 other species. This is just an update on the status of those 2 species where we found that the original action jeopardized or adversely modified. And it's just a tag on here to say that those species have not improved and in some cases have declined since 2008. So that's something that we're going to have to consider both in the Willamette Basin Review BiOp as well as the reinitiated 2008 BiOp, along with any other changes to the baseline and considerations of climate change and things like that. So it's just a reminder that in the reinitiation, we're going to be updating everything that we review and the action against. That's it.
Thanks, Kim. And maybe it's because I'm standing behind the podium. I don't know. But real quick. So in summary, we are just beginning that process, and we'll be going out and holding a series of scoping meetings on what inputs do we need and what are the different perspectives that we need to consider as we prepare our biological assessment. And so those meetings will be coming up in the near term, and so therefore heads up, it's a chance to provide input. And then when we get towards the end of the process and have a draft EIS, again, that will come out for public comment. So in the near term, this is the slide that I spoke of way in the beginning of kind of what is a summary of the different chances that there are for public comment. Because I realize that you all, in your interests in the groups that you represent, don't have unlimited resources as far as providing. And if we were asking you for comments about 47 things at one time, that's hard to do. But here kind of lays out the things I've talked about. On top is the Willamette Basin Review, the reallocation study. Okay, we are past, as I showed the list, we are past the comment stage. We are in consultation with NIMS, as Kim described. However, I do know, for instance, that we have gotten letters since we've been in consultation that say, hey, have you considered? We do read those letters and see if whether or not we feel we have addressed what the issues are and whether it changes anything. So we do continue to read and look if we get, but the formal consultation or formal comment period is over, and we're now in consultation as Kim described. The second piece is on Cougar. Chris's project and the downstream, the floating screen structure, the FSS, at Cougar. We believe that we're going to be doing an environmental assessment. That draft environmental assessment will be coming out for a 30-day public period, comment period, on or about the 11th of March. So if you have comments about on the McKinsey at Cougar Dam on that FSS, that will be the chance to provide for public comment. Jeff's project at Detroit. Okay, as mentioned, we're at the point of we're drafting our draft EIS, and in late May, that will be coming out for a 60-day comment period. Again, we would like to stick to that schedule and hope that folks can provide comment so we can continue to move forward with that. That will be coming, though, in late May is when that will be coming out for 60 days. And that's the Detroit. And that's that temperature control, the selective withdrawal structure attached to the dam and or not. We'll come up with what our answer is. We're putting that out for comment, what we think we're going to go forward with, so we can get your comments on whether we're going down the right path. So that'll be in late May. And then last but not least, we have the whole combination of these will be included. So some of these the work done in the Willamette Basin Review, as far as the reallocation, the construction of an FSS at Cougar, temperature and FSS at Detroit, will be part of what we're putting together when we do our analysis of the BA. They will be part of our no action alternative. And what that basically means is they will be assumed to be the base condition that we're starting our biological assessment from. And with those in place is our assumption as we go forward with the EIS. We will be holding a series of public comment meetings, public scoping meetings between May and June. Will be coming out around to have those meetings to receive that input. So this is kind of the summary of the input of the things that we've talked about and the next steps as we go forward. Sir, I think that as far as this section, that completes.
Very good, thank you. Gives us all an idea of how we as the pub.
I'm sorry, I did forget one, sir.
All right, go ahead. Yes, sir.
My apologies. I did want to acknowledge that there are current lawsuits that are undergoing, and that we are being challenged on in different agencies. There's two primarily. One has to do with the plan and implementation of the BiOp, and one has to do with hatcheries. The only reason that I mention those is just simply because they will go through the process. If there are any changes that come out of that process, then we will work that into, our plans as we go forward. So I just want you to know that those are happening, and if more comes out appropriate, if it changes our direction or changes things for any reason, then we'll have to communicate that. But for now, I just wanted you to be aware that they are happening, and we'll see what goes on from there. My apologies, sir.
Oh, that's great. Again, we'll take questions here. I just want to point out Carolyn's here with Bureau of Reclamation. If you guys have questions on the irrigation contracts, feel free to reach out to her, and she'll be glad to talk to you.
Carolyn, I'm sorry.
So, just going to open up here with the panel in general. We've heard a lot about the federal actions occurring virtually simultaneously with the 2008 BiOp, the EIS on pieces of the BiOp like the Troy Dam and others. So there's a lot for all of us to be paying attention to. I guess the question would be, is there a way for the public and stakeholders to really... Sorry about that. So bottom line, is there a way for public and stakeholders to help inform some of these actions to be part of the solution, recognizing compliance with all the legal restrictions and regulatory regulations? How could stakeholder discussions be convened to help inform the conversation? I guess my question to the group is, are you guys open to that? Would sound like it. Kim?
Sure.
Yes, you next, Colonel.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, NIMS is open to any collaborative process to bring these projects to a successful conclusion. I would mention that we are in consultation with the Corps of Engineers on the Willamette Basin Review reallocation. Once we're at that point, it's an active consultation, and it's typically a focused consultation between the action agency and us.
Public would comment after that potentially?
Once we've completed consultation, it's done. I mean, the public can comment on the implementation of that, but the consultation, the Section 7 consultation is completed.
Colonel?
And I think Kevin mentioned there are a number of public outreaches, and he mentioned, I think, 4, and some of those have a number of public scoping meetings to have those discussions, one in a similar fashion like this. You did mention FACA, which is the Federal Advisory Act, and I think it's of 1972. But we don't have special groups that we convene and host specifically to get input from one user or another. We have government to government, which we can do, and we do that through consultation. We also do it through the tribes as part of our tribal responsibility to do government to government consultation as formal between sovereign and sovereign. So those are some of the things that are outside of that. But we don't have special advisory groups from the outside to advise us on how to do a particular issue. That's where the public scoping is, and meetings such as this to get input, not only through questions, but as part of the process so we can get into the comments and into the process that we use. So, and there's a number of those in the next, I think, it's like about 4 months. There's a whole host of those to get the input from all the different users. But there's no, we don't meet with one group specific to set up advisory groups. And we've met with a number of folks people come and talk to us all the time, but we don't have specific forums to do different things to make sure we remain compliant with that act.
Thank you, guys. So, some of the questions. Isn't it highly likely that the IS will provide information that will inform reallocation? And if so, doesn't it make sense to wait for that before finalizing reallocation? It's sort of been addressed a little bit in the presentation. Kevin, you want to reiterate this?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to. So as mentioned, as far as the reallocation, I mean, we acknowledge that the 2008 and the process to update the 2008 BiOp and the reconsultation with that could have an effect on the other side. However, as mentioned, this is a project that we've been working on for 3 years, and we need to bring to conclusion, and with that as a starting point, that will be part of the new consultation. And so if it does change through the process, then it will change and we will address that as necessary. But from our perspective, I'm guessing, and we don't know, but whether or not how much it will affect. Right now, we have 1.6 million acre feet set aside or allocated for joint storage. And we have the opportunity now to reallocate that, and then we will relook at it with the new BiOp.
Sir?
Yep, go ahead.
Add to that, please. Tangentially related to this is the issue of regarding reallocation, is that this is stored water that is released downstream. Currently, all of that stored water behind those reservoirs is tied up in 2 certificates, mostly tied up in 2 certificates for irrigation. So the reallocation is going to distribute this to other users, municipalities, fish. There's no authorization currently in state law for that stored water to be used as fish and protected. So when that water is released downstream, it's unprotected fish flows. So that means that as you have water users downstream that are taking water out of the streams, they can do that. That water is treated as natural flow. Until the water is reallocated for fish and wildlife purposes behind those dams, the state of Oregon cannot turn around and convert those releases to in-stream water rights. That's where the protection of those flows is going to come in. So this comes into the picture of, do you reallocate now and get that process started, or do you wait down the road until you've completed your consultation?
Comment, Kurt?
Thanks, and I would just add, Congressman, there's always going to be another analysis, another review on the horizon, and at some point, we need to move forward. We can adapt in the future as new information becomes available, but I think it's time. This has been sitting there, not even simmering for decades.
Well, the Willamette Basin Review, BiOp, we're in consultation. The Willamette Basin Project has been reinitiated. The primary focus of both actions is the storage and release of water. And in both of those consultations, we're going to be looking at fish passage, in-stream flow protection, and water quality. So there is a certain heuristic value of looking at all of that together as a whole as opposed to individual consultations. That said, as I mentioned before, we don't have the ability to say we don't want to consult on this action right now. So NIMS is committed to continuing to work collaboratively with the Corps to complete the Willamette Basin Review reallocation consultation as requested. That will then become part of the baseline against which we review the action that's proposed in the reinitiated 2008 RPA. So,
good.
There were several questions alluding to whether or not the climate change is being taken into account as we go through this 2008 and BiOp and EIS review.
our consultations take into account climate change and the data that we can pull together that address climate change as it affects the likely status of our species and as it affects the likely stream flow, storage, and dynamics into the future to the degree that we can.
So are and how are changes and improvements in electric transmission storage technology being factored into reallocation evaluations and approaches?
I would say that the Northwest Power and Conservation Council are the experts in this space, but I can say that storage right now is primarily focused in the United States and around the world on several hours of storage to be able to capture energy, say in the morning or the afternoon, and then use it again later on in the day. The technology is not to the point yet where you can use storage for electric production to move energy production in a way that would influence the kind of timeframes that we're talking about here. So it's not really pertinent to the reallocation questions. And I think even more broadly, I would say in general, and Kevin, please check me on this, but it isn't hydropower that is typically driving the main releases in the river that lead to the allocation questions.
Right, and yeah, that is correct. I mean, we have, I think, somewhere between 400 and 500 megawatts, and it's scattered over 12 different plants, and most are fairly small. They're high head. It's different in the Columbia, so there's not a whole lot of, we're not pumping storage or changing based on it because of the head.
There were a couple of questions regarding storage, and such as when it comes to storage, have you considered increasing storage instead of reducing allocations? Seems this could be done in concert with fish transport facilities. And then second question, what's the ratio of dollars spent on hard construction versus the studies? How much money are we studying and how much are we actually building with?
So on the first, as far as increasing the storage, and correct me guys, physically, I don't think we can. I mean, the the structures are what the structures are, the storage behind them, and how it's calculated is what it is. I don't know that we can increase the storage available to meet the needs, and I'm not seeing anyone shake their head differently. So as far as the storage, as far as percentage of study versus, I mean, that's a very, very difficult question to answer, because the studies go across so many things and are spread among and support so many different projects. I don't know that it's a one-to-one. So I don't think I have a number. I know that design for, what is design normally, guys? Like 10 to 15%? What's the normal design for a project? Design to construction? Maybe not. So that's a very hard one to answer. I don't know what the percentages of study versus construction are.
Fair. For water resources, get my spectacles on here. How would the share the pain approach to water shortage comport with the prior appropriations doctrine? And I have no idea what that exactly means, but
Well, I'll take a shot at it.
good question.
It is a good question, and I prefer not to call it share the pain. It's share the shortfall, if you don't mind. But the concept there is that when the reservoirs don't fill up, so you don't have the amount of water necessary to share with everyone, somehow that has to be distributed amongst those demands downstream. Okay? So the concept that has been put out there is that it is equally felt by the allocated uses. And that is what has been talked about. There are other scenarios that have been talked about as well. But what has been put forward so far is that it would be essentially prorated based upon essentially the amount of contracts that are in place. So if you think of the reservoirs as before they're fully allocated or before they're fully contracted, any water that's not contracted is essentially joint use water that can be shared amongst the other uses as necessary. And so the goal here is to maximize the way to use this when the water is short, is the share the shortfall concept. With prior appropriation, we're still going to adhere to the priority dates of water rights. Water rights for the amount of storage that is released for, say, irrigation, will be allocated to those water rights that meet that certain list of priorities that take that volume of water. And the same would go for municipalities, and as we've talked about, fish would also be part of that share the shortfall.
And I'll add, the number that we've thrown out of the storage is what the core stores behind the 13 dams is the 1.59 million acre feet that's at the top of the rule curve, and that's the assumption that all of the reservoirs fill. And again, it varies from year to year, and our goal is to try to get to that point. We won't go over that point because there's risk with that, but the intent is to get to that. So that's making the assumption to have the full allocation that all the reservoirs do fill at the point of the rule curve that Kevin showed you, usually in the kind of mid-spring.
I'm going to expose my total ignorance here. In some of the questions and some of the underlying comments, there's I think maybe a misunderstanding, maybe I misunderstand. Currently, the water behind the dams is not allocated except for, theoretically not allocated except for this irrigation purpose at this point in time. So the shortfall, I think most of the folks are saying, hey, we don't have enough water in the rivers right now. The fish are already in trouble. How can you talk about, sharing the burden with, less, bad years and the water shortages? It's my understanding that one of the potential benefits of this process might be that this water behind the dam that is currently unallocated, not set up for fish, could be a whole new addition to our ability to operationalize better fish passage that we currently don't have at this point in time. Is that accurate reflection?
Sir, if you don't mind, I'm going to, and between Doug and ask Lori to help out, because there is a difference. When we talk reallocation, we're talking about allocating the storage water, the storage that's behind a dam. That is different than the dam filling and emptying every year. So, Lori, would you mind helping us understand that difference? Let's do it quick. And Doug, if you want to.
Hopefully this is far enough back, I'm not yelling at people. The storage is currently allocated in the reservoirs. It's allocated as joint use, which is all the purposes. So right now, when we release stored water, we release it to meet irrigation contracts, and we also release it to meet BiOp flow objectives. The reason our analysis doesn't show major impacts to our ability to meet BiOp flow objectives after the reallocation is because the stored water that gets released for irrigation and municipal and industrial water supply use would stay in the rivers quite a ways before it's withdrawn, and it would help to meet the BiOp flow objectives.
And would you also just talk about the difference between, I mean, the idea is the storage, it's not the actual water that I'm talking about, and the difference between what we're reallocating versus the annual.
Right, so we would be reallocating storage, but our analysis did look at about 80 different water years, so different volumes of refill, and what the impacts would be to meeting the authorized purposes. So in any given year, when we share the shortfall, yes, there would be a reduced amount of stored water specifically available to those purposes, but when we work as an interagency group to manage the water in any given year, we don't demonstrate major impacts to our ability to continue to meet the authorized purposes. So the BiOp flow objectives, they're met by live flow, they're met by stored flow that would be released specifically for fish and wildlife, but they would also be met by stored flow that's released for irrigation and M&I before it's withdrawn from the stream.
So I think Lori's comment about having a collaborative operation is extremely important, because the share the shortfall is an interesting proposal. Right now, the in-stream flows of the biological opinion are the minimum flows necessary to sustain those ESUs. If the allocation to ag and to municipalities are not the minimum flows necessary, for instance, for hygiene and cooking, then when we get to a scenario of share the shortfall, if we're sharing away the minimum flows necessary for the ESUs to spawn, rear, and migrate, and that's not the similar minimum for ag and municipalities, then it becomes a significant issue for being able to maintain these ESUs. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think that's where some sort of a collaborative process to make sure that it is an equitable distribution where we can of sharing the shortfall, as opposed to sharing below the minimum when it's not the minimum for other sectors.
I appreciate that comment, frankly, and I think the goal would be, hopefully, as we get into implementation and these types of issues, that we can have a real thoughtful process. Fish requirements are going to be higher during certain times of the year, ag purposes, other times of the year. Cities might have to deal with storage and other opportunities to prevent, problems for their residents as they get into these types of situations. But I mean, the fact you guys are even considering this and looking at this, I think, is really, really huge. Well, yes, go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to finish up here. Good meeting's one that finishes on time or even a little bit early. I've tried to get to most everyone's questions. I think we're all a little bit smarter than we were an hour and a half ago, or 2.5 hours ago, whatever it was. And we're all still paying attention. That's a good sign. So I'd urge everybody to stay in touch with our office and, frankly, with the partners here at the table with further questions, concerns. We all have our respective groups that we're representing. I represent you guys. And to the extent we can come up with thoughtful considerations about how we want to approach this, raise good questions for the delegation to respond to in Washington, D.C. Congress, if the WBR goes all the way through, will have some role in implementing it. Certainly the appropriations that the Corps gets to do some of the good work they're doing runs through the United States Congress. And so we'll be paying very close attention to this. We'll be responding to all groups. We're not going to favor the fish folks. We're not going to favor the ag folks. We're not going to favor the municipalities or industrial users. Our goal, I think, in this delegation, Peter or Earl or Suzanne or Jeff or Ron can beat me up on this, but our goal is to make sure it works for the Valley. You know, we represent all you guys at the end of the day. So please get in touch with us. Let us know your concerns. And ideally, at the end of the day, as we get into implementation, it sounds like our partners are very interested in being thoughtful and creative and hopefully floating most everybody's boat in a positive manner as we get through this. Colonel?
Again, I just want to say thanks for inviting us, and really want to kind of throw a shout out to Kevin for putting this together and really doing a lot of the talking. There's a lot of complex. Can give him a big round of applause. I know there's a lot of complex things that were discussed today, and really what I wanted to kind of leave you with is the Willamette Valley, at least from a core perspective, it's a very complex project. There's a whole lot of basins, sub-basins, there's a number of streams, there's a number of dams, and then there's a number of dams with a lot of different purposes. And each one of those purposes you can think of as an indivariant variable. And the way the chief kind of explained it in a different public forum is you know, we have our hand on a lot of different knobs, or you can call them rheostats, and we're managing hydropower, navigation, flood, recreation, storage, environmental, and we have to, you can't just turn one over here and one over here in one direction. They all have to kind of turn together so the system works and provides the flood risk management, which is the primary purpose for the valley. So everything has to kind of turn and synchronize and work together. And if it doesn't, then we could potentially jeopardize one or more of those purposes. And that's what we're trying to do. And we need the input, and the feedback from you is very important for understanding all the things. And there's things that we learned, especially about Salem's water supply, as we start looking about making changes in the system. The changes had impacts to users downstream that we didn't anticipate. So that's important to us. So again, I encourage for you to attend those public meetings and to provide that feedback to help us really try to provide the best service that we can as one of your larger managers of public infrastructure within the Willamette Valley. And sir, again, thanks again for putting this together and supporting us trying to provide those services to the valley.
We got great attendance. Obviously, it's a issue, probably one of the biggest issues this valley is going to face in my lifetime. So I really appreciate everyone's participation here. And with that, we're adjourned.